The wind moved slow through the dry grass as 16-year-old Clara Mercer walked alone toward the town well, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes fixed on the dust at her feet, because in Bitter Creek, girl learned early that looking up invited trouble, and trouble found her anyway when the laughter came first, low and mocking, then closer, boots scraping wood, spurs clinking like a warning bell. She had heard too many times. 3 men leaning against the saloon rail with whiskey on their breath and cruelty in their smiles. Outlaws passing through, but staying long enough to poison the air. One stepping forward to block her path, tipping his hat with false politeness, while the others circled like wolves testing a fence, asking questions that weren't questions at all, making jokes that burned worse than the sun, hands too close, voices too loud, and Clara felt her throat tighten, but she did not scream, because her mother had taught her that fear fed men like these, and still her heart hammered as the tallest one grabbed her bucket and spilled the water into the dirt just to watch it soak away, telling her she could earn another if she smiled nicer. And that was when the door of the dry goods store creaked open across the street, and every sound seemed to pull tight like a rope, because standing there was Eliza Mercer, widowed, quiet, dressed in plain gray, her hair braided back, her face unreadable, watching not with panic, but with a stillness that made the air heavy, the kind of stillness that comes before thunder, and the men noticed her only enough to laugh. Again, one calling out that she should teach her daughter better manners, another suggesting the girl needed a husband or a lesson, and Eliza said nothing. She never said anything in town that was what people believed, that she was a woman hollowed out by loss when her husband died years ago, that she kept to her small ranch and raised cattle and a daughter, and spoke softly because grief had taken her strength, but Clara knew better, because she had grown up listening to stories that were never told out loud, stories whispered by the fire at night, stories about a different name her mother once carried, about a rifle kept wrapped in oilcloth beneath the floorboards, about distances measured by breath and wind, about a time when men learned very quickly not to follow a woman who could see farther than they could run, and as the outlaws closed in, Eliza stepped off the boardwalk and began crossing the street slowly, not hurrying, not shouting, just walking, and something in the way she moved made one of the men hesitate, but pride pushed him forward anyway, grabbing Clara's arm hard enough to leave a mark, laughing as he pulled her close, and that was when Eliza stopped, her voice carrying clear and calm through the street, telling him to let go, not raised, not trembling, just certain, and the man laughed in her face, saying she'd have to make him, and for a moment the town seemed to hold its breath, shutters half closed, people watching without stepping in, because Bitter Creek had learned that outlaws made examples of those who interfered, and Eliza nodded once, as if accepting a fact, turned back toward the store, and the men relaxed, thinking it was over, thinking she was beaten, but Clara saw what they didn't, the way her mother's shoulders squared, the way her hand brushed the side of her coat, and fear flickered through Clara not for herself, but for the men who didn't yet know who they were facing, because some legends don't announce themselves, they wait, and as Eliza disappeared inside, the outlaws laughed louder, unaware that the story of Bitter Creek was about to change. And if you want to hear how justice rides back into town when it's least expected, make sure you subscribe now, because this is only the beginning. The first shot cracked through the afternoon like lightning, sharp and clean, splintering the saloon rail inches from the outlaw's hand, close enough to draw blood, and the laughter died instantly as Eliza Mercer stepped back into the street holding a long rifle that looked like it belonged to the land itself, steady against her shoulder, her eyes cold and focused, not on the men's faces, but on the spaces between heartbeats, and before anyone could move she fired again, a warning shot that shattered a whiskey bottle beside the second man's boot, glass spraying, forcing him back, and the third reached for his gun too late, because Eliza had already measured him, already adjusted for wind, and her bullet took the brim of his hat clean off, sending it spinning into the dirt, and that was when the name finally surfaced from memory, whispered first, then louder, someone behind a window saying it in disbelief. "That's Widow Mercer, that's Red Hawk Eliza." And the men froze, color draining from their faces as recognition caught up with fear, because stories had traveled faster than they had. Stories of a woman who once guarded wagon trains alone, who had ended ambushes before they began, who had buried men without ever raising her voice, and Eliza spoke then, telling them to drop their weapons and leave town on foot, telling them that if they ran, she would let them, but if they turned back she would not miss. And for the first time since they rode in, the outlaws listened, one dropping his gun, another raising his hands, the third backing away step by step, eyes locked on the rifle as if it were alive. And Clara stood frozen until her mother called her name, gentle again. The storm passed, and when the men finally fled down the road, Bitter Creek exhaled, people stepping out into the light, stunned, grateful, ashamed for having watched in silence, and Eliza lowered the rifle, her hands steady, walking to her daughter and pulling her close, checking her arm, whispering that she was safe now, that no one would touch her again, because some protection isn't loud until it has to be. And in the days that followed, the town changed, doors opened when the Mercers passed, hats tipped, eyes respectful, and Clara understood then why her mother had hidden who she was, why strength sometimes waits until it's needed most,